make me stronger, live a little bit longer, take in the views of mountain, breathe in another sunrise, skip through the poppies, kiss another sun.
Keep going.
Breathe in all the goodness. There's nothing really wrong. The spell was cast centuries ago. Centuries ago. Love is our mission. Love is our song. It's time to walk away. Put away that gun. Put away that gun. We are the ones. We are the ones. We are the ones to keep love alive. We are the ones. We are the ones. We are the ones to keep love alive. Breathe in all the goodness. There's nothing really wrong. The spell was cast centuries ago. Centuries ago.
Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, and we're here in San Rafael, California at Terrapin Crossroads, a wonderful establishment created by Phil Lesh, and joined here today by a divine priestess, wonderful person, somebody who's always interested in looking towards the light. Tara Spring, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you for having me.
Can you talk to the audience? I think a lot of people, we live in a very kind of formulaic, almost conformist time, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the first time you were really able to access your multidimensional self.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I was 17 and I was doing Kundalini yoga.
I knew you were going to say that.
And
That was hip back then?
that was very hip back then, and I hooked up with Swami Sachinanda. He had come over here. He was teaching yoga. I was very young and very impressionable, and I met his gang of fellas dressed in their white
I thought he was an
robes.
East Coast cat.
Um,
But you met him in L.A.
I met him down in L.A.
Continue. I'm sorry.
And I also met him in Hawaii later. He came to my very first dance performance, but that's another story. But so I would have to say that I was in this classroom. I remember this so well, so young, and I had just done a whole session in this class. I'd been going in the class for maybe 3 weeks, and I had an out-of-the-body experience.
Let's break it down. I want to know the exact. Take us through the whole thing.
What happened was we did the yoga. The yoga was amazing, and I kept learning the yoga. And, you know, when you do Kundalini, you are doing yoga. You're breathing fast, doing your breath of fire. So everyone in the class apparently got up and left, and I was still stretched out on the floor. And so someone finally came over to me, and they gently nudged me, and I was not asleep. I was out of my body.
You were gone.
And that was my first out-of-the-body experience, and I was watching myself from somewhere else. Anyway, it was very bizarre. So after that, I fully embraced yoga, Tai Chi. These are all the, my beginnings of experiencing something otherworldly.
You said Billy Cobham talked about being playing with Mahavishnu Orchestra, and Billy never has done a drug in his life, but he was very fatigued, and at the end of the last set of a very long tour, he actually saw himself on the side of the stage playing drums, even though he was playing drums.
Oh,
All right,
really?
So what is what you said you could see yourself from above?
Right.
Was that in hindsight, or was that in the real time? I mean, what I'm trying to get at is the feeling of the multidimensional self in the real time.
It's when you're having an out of the body experience like that, it's really hard to explain because you're
Absolutely.
not quite sure what happened. So I have to say that after that experience, I've been a total fan of Kundalini yoga all these years. I mean, it definitely, had an effect on me for my later years in growing up.
You talk about, a lot of the cats I talk to, one of the chapters in my first book involves the calling of music, and as it relates to almost the priest-like celibacy, that there's a drive that is almost illogical. There's a calling, you have to get it out of your system.
Right.
As it relates to your music, though, was that latent?
No,
or
not then.
Can you talk about whatever it is in the artistic, in whatever endeavor, whatever channel, whatever form of art that you feel, can you talk about that calling in the sense, can you give an example of when you said, I can't believe I'm doing this is crazy, but yet it made total sense because of the calling?
You mean my experience with being an artist and a musician?
Doesn't have to be music, could be any kind of art form, but it's the idea of that calling.
Let's see. There's always this for me in life, there is always this pushing forward,
Not
trying.
projection, though.
Just inside of me. I think we're all, in the human species, I think we're driven, right? We are driven to be something, to be somebody, to eventually, when we come into ourselves as we, grow older and wiser, is we find a way to own who we are. And I think it takes us a lifetime or many lifetimes within this one lifetime to figure out what that is. So for me, very sadly to say, my parents wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer. I came from a wealthy family in Carmel, and I was born a hippie. I'm sorry, I didn't care about, I care less about clothes, money, things like that. I love life, I love music, I love art. And so I eventually got a VW camper and traveled around.
I love it.
And went to festivals.
I love it.
And you know, that was my life, and that was my calling at that point. You know, I was a dancer at a very young age and driven to be a dancer, and I was enamored with musicians, you know, really hot lead guitar players. I have a thing for the lead guitar.
You like lead guitar players, yeah.
Yes.
Were you marinating in the psychedelic Southern California scene of the Birds and the Burrito Brothers and those? What kind of cats?
Okay, this you'll appreciate this,
Yeah.
Jake. When I was 16, 17, 18, maybe 17, 18, when I lived in Carmel, Monterey area, I was going to the Monterey Fairgrounds where they had the Monterey Pop Festival.
Wow.
And I was seeing Santana and Joy of Cooking and a bunch of other bands I can't
Maybe Ravi
remember.
Shankar. Was Ravi there?
I don't remember seeing Ravi Shankar, but I was a rock and roll girl back
I
then,
dig.
so I was more into that. I got more into Ravi Shankar and all that, but through a whole another medium later. I was a classical Indian dancer for 40 years, and another story. But anyway, so I would drag my son, he was very young, 2-3 years old, and we would go to the Monterey Fairgrounds, and I would go in the back gate, and I would all, you know, cutesy say, I'm the sound girl's old lady. When you were young, that's what you were. You were your guy's old lady. And at the time, when you were 17, it was kind of cool. I don't think I'd want to be that now, but
It was lingo at that
so
time, yeah.
it was lingo when you were that young. And so
And then you got back, and you were able to get back.
yes, so I went in. They always let me in, and I never paid.
Of course they did, yeah.
And I danced my butt off all night long. And I remember Santana back then, I think, you know, they were still young and they were still just coming
Yeah,
out.
they didn't even know how to. They didn't have any bridges in their songs.
And,
They didn't.
and,
Yeah.
and this is terrible to say because I have met Carlos and he's played in Fairfax an impromptu visit one night with his wife, the amazing drummer. And I remember him being very shy about playing at the Monterey Fairgrounds. So I think they were just a young up and coming group, but they were amazing. And sadly to say, they played there it seemed like every weekend Santana played at the Monterey Fairgrounds.
Really?
I mean, if you look it up back then.
Because I mean, they were known as a Bay Area band. It's
I
interesting
know,
that they would travel down there all the time.
But I don't know why.
Maybe it was a gig. Yeah.
It was a gig. They must have been being paid. It was a gig, and they were great. They were fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And but I remember this. What I want to say is that I remember telling my friend, "Do you think some other band will be playing this week?" Little did I know, but you know, in all due respect, they were the first band, you know, that I remember dancing, you know, like a band.
letting the body dance.
Oh.
This is what I want, because you're a dancer. I mean,
Yes, and the music definitely comes through, you know, and it brings the dance out in people, and dance to me is the thing that's going to keep me living a long time.
well, absolutely. I want to touch on two things. The idea that your folks, how hard was it for you to just let go of the fact that they were never going to accept your true nature?
Oh,
They would always love you, but you were
Yes.
never going to do.
I never lived up to.
So when did that? I mean, obviously you had a child when you were young, but I mean, the truth is, when did you let that go? How hard was it for you to let that go?
I think when I was around 35 is when I realized, you know, because you do spend a large amount of your time wanting to please your parents. It's only natural. And I definitely wanted to be all I could be for them, but I was born a rebel. I was not born the nice little girl that was going to go to college and do what they wanted. I was born a hippie. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say it. I mean,
Is your definition? Hippies get so marginalized, but is it just somebody that is anti-establishment? Is that what it comes down to?
in a certain way, yes. I think, you know, back then when I was young, being a hippie was more than just, you know, wearing funky clothes or whatever. It was about love. It was about spreading love. It was about being love. It was about sharing that with the world. And that's what I wanted, and I thought for sure that the world's going to be a better place, and that, it will gravitate towards love, right? But, we all have our expectations. And so what I realized within this process, I guess I was, about 35 years old, and I realized my parents finally my father was never able to accept, he was a hard veteran of war, Korean War. I mean,
he hated hippies.
He hated hippies, and that is so funny you say that, because he would always
Yeah.
say, "Those damn hippies," right? And so he was very against it. But my mother was a lot more accepting, and my mother was very cool. She was the cool one in the family. I mean, my father survived the Bataan Death March. He was in a prison camp
In the
for
Korean
2
War?
years in the Korean War.
He was in a death camp.
Yes,
Oh,
he was in Japan, or on, what was it? I feel so bad, because he used to always tell me the war story, and I'd always say, "Dad, I have to hear the war story again?" It wasn't until he died that I realized what he really went through, and it's a shame that I wasn't more compassionate and understanding. But I was not about war at all.
I dig. No, I mean, but
And so
maybe
we
he
were
was,
in two different worlds.
and that's fine. But
I
at 35,
love
when
him.
did you and did you come to peace with him though before he passed?
Yes. I had a wonderful relationship with both my parents before they passed. And my mother fully accepted me. In fact, she was so proud of me, because at that point I was dancing with the Chithresh Das Dance Company, and we were doing shows, and I was performing. And I went to India with this dance troupe, and we performed in India. And then she started seeing that, well, I guess she really means this, or wants to really, be this kind of a person,
I
or
love
do
it.
this sort of thing. So my mother accepted me fully. My father always had a hard time. I can remember visiting him. He had moved to Spokane, Washington. And I went up to visit him, and I remember I embarrassed him so badly. I was doing ballet leaps down the main street when I was, we had separated. I'd gone shopping, and they'd gone shopping, and then he saw me, and he went, "We're over here," and I started doing ballet leaps all the way down the street.
He's like, "I don't know who she is."
And he was so embarrassed. This is the kind of stuff I used to do, and he had a hard time with it. He would always just have a fit, because I was kind of a clown, and always...
Well, you're being yourself. I mean,
always the one in the family to be... I was the oddball, I was always the oddball. And
I want you to... We talked a little bit about, off air, about love, and how maybe we thought that we would have evolved a little bit more as human animals. We are human animals. I think human beings is a little bit too generous a word at this
Right.
time. But can you talk a little bit about, like, the idea of, I've just learned on this journey that when you look at these macro issues, I don't care if it's, gender discrimination or cultural bias or equal rights or whatever it is, for any one of us to try to bite off any of that is just too large. So it's really about affecting positive change in your world, doing it at a micro level. And I just wonder if that's something that you agree with, or whether, because you thought we'd be farther along the progression of love at this point.
I did.
And I wonder, without being demoralized, how you affect how you affect positive change in your world.
By being love every moment. My mother raised me in a way where she said to me that your ticket to life and into people's hearts is kindness. And she told me to be kind in every single moment. So I'm the person that goes into the gas station and says to the fella, "How you doing today, buddy?" I'm the one that takes the extra second
Unprompted.
to look them in the eye.
You're doing it.
To look them in the eye, and to recognize them as a human being. And you know, like I played Friday night in Nevada on the street by myself,
I love it.
solo.
You're busking.
I made $1, and I had a blast. Because you know why? Because all the people walking by were so grim. You know, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to look at me. They didn't know, what are you doing there? You know, this is sort of odd. And I just gave them the most beautiful smile that I could, my California smile, as my girlfriend Kristen calls it. And you know, they all smiled back. If you smile at someone, they will usually smile back. So my mother taught me the way to love is to be kind in every moment. So that's what I've learned. And that's what I try and do. I try and be kind.
Is that something that is your true nature, or is it, because I think that it's easier said than done to be that way? Is that something that, like you said, your mother taught you that?
My mother taught me
But did
that.
you have to work on that? Was your habitual nature,
Of course,
something where you had a hard time getting out of the way of your ego?
You know, I've always been the carefree, happy kid.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, when we're young, you know, we have a big ego, and we have to protect it. And so
Everybody does, yeah.
Everybody does. And so you might not feel, you know, you feel shy. And I didn't have the confidence when I was younger. No one does. You know, you grow into yourself. And so I've grown into this state of beingness. And you know, I don't know how to say it, but, you know, I'm relatively a happy person. Of course, I have my ups and downs. And I'm not special in any way, but by being kind to every single person I come in contact with, there's people I'll meet on the trail, and we cross, and I'll say, "Excuse me, I'm Tara, and I just wanted to meet you because I think it's unusual that we've crossed paths. I feel like every single person, like you're out in the woods, you know, I hike a lot, and I hike a lot alone, and whenever I see someone on the trail, I'll connect. Most people just want to walk by you. They don't even want to look at you. They hardly want to say hi, right? Not with me around. I'm going to change that. You know, that's my mission in my song. You know, love is my mission. Love is my song. And so this song that came through me recently, my most written song, just says it all, kind of. You know, put away that gun.
Well, I wanted you to talk about that, is that you were staying at a house that I've long, is Garcia's house in Hepburn Heights that he shared with Rock Scully. There are pictures of it.
Yes.
But I've never actually been there, and you spent time there.
Yes.
And, you know, in full disclosure, we're at Phil Lesch's wonderful establishment, but you were not a Grateful Dead fan.
Was not.
And yet, I would like you to talk about Cliff Notes version, about the impact that Garcia's spirit had on you in creating the song that you opened the broadcast with.
Well, when I was house sitting at this place, taking care of this darling little dog named Kingsley, and so this house was beautiful, overlooking the bay, and it was in San Rafael. And
Hepburn Heights, is that right?
Hepburn Heights.
Hepburn Heights, yeah.
And so when I found out that Jerry Garcia had lived there, he actually lived in the apartment downstairs, which I didn't go in, and Rock Scully lived upstairs, but they had a recording studio in this one little room, and they had like a sliding glass door with a tiny little porch, and apparently Jerry would play on that porch.
At 4 a.m. after a Jerry Garcia, after 3 hours of
The neighbor next door told me, "Oh yeah, he'd be playing till 4 or 5 in the morning.
Legend,
Go after gigging all night." And goes, "Oh yeah, everyone knew Jerry. That was Jerry." Anyway, so I was in his recording studio, and the people who lived there, the fella had a great amp, and he said I could play it, and so this song, I think it just felt like Jerry wrote this song. It didn't feel like I wrote it, because I just sat down and wrote it down. And then, of course, I worked weeks on the melody and trying to put it together. But all in all, I have to say that I felt like he came through, you know. And the thing is, I have all these friends who are Grateful Dead people, fans. I mean, they were brought up with it.
Fanatical.
All their shows.
Freaks.
They're
It's a good word. Yeah, it's a good
they're
word.
into it. It's their thing.
I dig.
Right. So I almost didn't have any choice. I missed it because I was living in Hawaii then in a treehouse. You know, I wasn't listening to music. I was playing music. And so anyway, long story short, I love their music now because I've heard it over and over and over from these different fellas that I've hung out with. I've had no choice but to jump on the bandwagon there. And now I love it. I love their music. I love being here at Terrapin. You know, I love the way they have been so gracious and bringing in a lot of musicians from where I live, Fairfax. Are playing.
I think
here.
Phil lived there for a long time.
Phil lived in Fairfax.
Phil was that's when he had Too Loose to Truck, that band I was telling you about.
Yeah, exactly. And he wanted to put this club in Fairfax, but you know what? This is a better place.
I dig. Yeah, it's a
more
great.
space.
It's just beautiful.
But anyway, long story short, I stayed in this house, and it was, you know, a house Jerry had lived in, and I mentioned it to a few Jerry Garcia people, and they went nuts. You stayed in the house where blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh. Anyway, so, you know, it's a fad around here to be a Grateful Dead person. It's a fad. It's a total fad. And I had my own. That is my experience with Jerry Garcia.
Yeah.
Staying in a house he lived in, and writing this song in his that I messed up. Sorry, in his studio.
Well, you didn't mess up. That you just carried it on. I mean,
Yeah.
the thing about Phil that's a genius move is that a lot of the younger cats that he recruited, guys like John Graboff and other younger cats, Mike Pascal and Alex Koford and so many other guys, they weren't well versed in the Dead vernacular. The last thing you would want to do at a place like Terrapin Crossroads is bring in Deadheads or guys that were in Dead cover bands.
Right,
So
right.
basically, the idea was that he was bringing in cats that would learn the songbook, but they were coming from a completely different point of view musically.
Yeah.
And I love, and truthfully, this is just the God's honest truth. Dead and Company is great. Those guys should be out doing exactly what Phil's doing, is creating regional hotbeds of music again for younger cats to be able to play, and most importantly, get paid for their work. And you know, but you know, I would like you to just talk to the audience about, you know, spiritually the third eye. A lot of people talk about the third eye, and to me, it's still vexing. But I always like to talk to the divine priestess, feminine priestess, about it. So I'd like you to riff on the third eye.
On the third eye. So, well, I'd have to say that through my whole yoga practice,
That's what I'm talking about.
and
Yeah.
I'm studying Tai Chi now, and I have been involved with yoga and all those things since I was 17, very young, and of course when I was young in my 20s, I got involved with psychedelics. What it did. Okay, this is a good point. What psychedelics did for me through the third eye experience is the drugs brought me to meditation.
How did now explain that? Because that for a lot of square people that won't make any sense.
There's something for me, you know, it's hard to explain, but I really didn't want to keep doing, you know, psychedelics.
Yeah, because you'd be roadkill, right? You'd be toast.
It wasn't it wasn't quite working for me to keep going that route to try to figure out something. So what happened, the few journeys I took when I was so young and so vulnerable and so wide open, somehow brought me, you know, I was doing the Kundalini yoga, and within that we were meditating. And so from that process, I went on to study Vipassana meditation. And if you know, the drugs might get you to the door, and they might even take you through the door, but in order to sustain that, you have to find something like meditation or yoga, or just some.
But the yogic practice, does the
yoga practice,
does it have to be the traditional sedentary yoga? I consider playing drums yogic. Is yoga
is
any
life?
Okay, so
yoga
yeah.
is life. Yoga, there's many kinds.
Because I don't want
yoga.
a purity test sometimes gets in the way of that, but it could be anything yoga.
Yeah, no, yoga is life, really. That's how I look at it. And so, for me, the third eye experience came back around for me to turn it inside instead of projecting out and being on drugs, whatever, trying to find it in that way. Just worked to a certain degree, and it opened up doors. It opened up incredible doors.
Can you give an example of a door that it opened?
Okay. This is a wild story, and I'm remembering this story. I just told it the other day. I was with these people. We were maybe 20. They were all at my house, and we all did, I think we were doing mescaline.
Yeah.
Whatever the guys came through and had. I never knew where to get anything. I wasn't, savvy in that way. And I remember at the time I was reading M.C. Escher.
Mm-hmm.
I had his book. Someone had given it to me. I was on this LSD and very young, very vulnerable, didn't quite understand, but, was trying to be trusting. And I remember I walked outside of my house and I sat on the stairs, and there in front of me was an M.C. Escher painting.
No.
With stairs going up to heaven. And at the time, I was completely into all the music from the 70s. I loved the Cream, Blue Cheer, Led Zeppelin.
You were a rocker.
Stairway
you
to
were
Heaven,
rock,
baby.
Yeah.
So this was my stairway to heaven, okay? And we were probably...
It's not exactly psychedelic music, but yeah, I mean, I dig it.
Are you kidding
Well, no, I mean
me?
the Zeppelin stuff.
The Jimmy Page on that lead
Cream,
guitar.
Ginger Baker. I dig.
What is that the right one, Jimmy Page?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I walked out and I started to go towards these stairs, and then my fear came in.
Paranoia.
And I got scared. But my impulse was to walk up these stairs into this painting in the sky. Is that bizarre?
No.
No?
No.
No. Anyway, so that was an experience I just have never forgotten. It stayed with me. It's so funny. I just told this story the other day, so I was able to have it refreshed.
Well, now it's out to the world. I mean, people are having a ball watching this.
It was like but it wasn't really there, but it was there, and I still can see it in my head.
Absolutely.
Maybe, possibly because I had the book and I'd been looking at his amazing artwork, and I was inspired by it. So for me to see this, anyway, I can't even believe I'm telling you this.
Well, I love it. I mean, this place is called Terrapin Crossroads. Terrapin Station has a great line, "Let my inspiration flow." So for you, was there a demarcation point? I feel as it relates, especially to climate change, however you come down on it, whether you think it's man-made or not. We were doing things in the early 70s before I was birthed that were as or more progressive than what we're doing today in some ways, ergonomically as it related to housing, and I just wonder if there was a couple of sociological points that you could point to where you felt like love dissipated, because the pendulum is shifted and it needs to come back. We're in the minority here.
Right.
Okay, what you're talking about so eloquently and what my show is about, we're in the minority, and we know that going in. But was there stuff that shifted the pendulum from when you really believed that love would win out, or that we'd be farther along on the spectrum of love?
That's a good question.
It's not personal. I mean, more like
No, I know what you're saying.
Existential kind of thing.
Well, I think because I moved to Maui and Hawaii, I lived there all through the 70s. I thought then that everything was.
Yeah, well, that would have been a really blissful place to live at
It was
that.
a blissful place to live, and it was a fantasy in a certain way because everyone was all about love then. So, we were doing it, all right? We were living it. I mean, this was a time when the Hare Krishna people, it was probably before your time.
Way before my
time. I don't know, but this was when they were allowed to be singing, chanting with finger cymbals at the airports.
Right. They'd be cordoned off somewhere now.
Yeah,
but it was very free.
So it was very free. The 70s, people say the 60s were so. I was pretty young, still a youngster then, but the 70s and my 20s, I thought the 70s were the greatest time. Even though we had crazy presidents and shit was going on and there was, protests and all this going on the mainland, we weren't doing this in Hawaii. We were following the Hare Krishna guys around, chanting Hare Krishna. So that was my mindset, my mind space then. We were in a beautiful world living near the ocean.
What was your first jolt of reality when you came back to the mainland?
When I first came back, it was, I landed in Marin on December 11th, 1978, the year you were born.
Wow, I was not even a year old.
weren't
That's
even
so
a year
beautiful. You were
old.
here in 78.
And 78,
Yeah.
I moved to Marin. I came here to study Kathak dance with the Chitresh Das Dance Company. And so I left my little tree house and strumming my guitar, trying to write songs, and I left to come here to study. And so when I hit Marin in 78, I never felt more at home. I thought Marin was cool.
Well, you're absolutely was.
Fantastic.
I know it was a hip place back
And
then.
it was pretty cool to land in Fairfax then. Fairfax, San Anselmo. I was there, would ride my bike everywhere, and I had a great life. And I still felt like we were progressing towards this universal kind of thought where everyone was going to be about love. And probably I didn't quite get it because I just became somewhat more interested in politics, I'm embarrassed to say, when Trump went into office, because it's been quite the circus. And I have seen and heard things I have never seen and heard in politics ever before. So I would have to say that, I'm more aware of a lot now because I've become more interested. But when was the demarcation?
Well, the Joe Sample, the brilliant piano player, he said that for him it was the beginning of Reagan. The whole philosophy of the country changed from the point of saying, I have mine, why don't you have yours?
Yes.
So the material,
Yes.
I think...
Yes, in the 80s, probably in there. But see, in the 80s, I remarried and I had a great life. And, unless you're personally being affected by these things,
Right.
if you're living a good life and things don't look that bad on the outside, you're not really paying attention.
Let me ask you something though, okay? Because I agree with this. For cats that are living a good life and they have food on their table and they're healthy and everything's secure, why should they care about the people on the border that haven't showered in 40 days, that aren't citizens of this country? That's part of the point. A lot of people would say they're not white. These people are brown, so they don't care. And you're just saying this. In some ways, you're saying I was not checked out, but I was living a good life. It didn't affect me.
It wasn't.
But now that you're a little bit more evolved,
yes,
talk to peeps around the world. Why should they care if they're comfortable about people that aren't citizens? That are coming here to escape tyranny or because they can't grow the same food because of climate change. Why should they care?
Well, number one, everyone should have a sense of compassion for other people, right? And we're all immigrants.
All immigrants.
We are all immigrants. And so, to me, the way, there is a certain agreement with coming across the border legally, But then there's also compassion. You cannot treat people the way they're being treated at the borders. It's horrible. And I personally have been a Democrat. You know, I didn't vote for a long time because I wasn't plugged in to politics.
You weren't into labels either. It wasn't like you were going to be labeled as this. Yeah.
But I wasn't that interested because I was doing other things and I was helping, I felt like, in my own way. But what's happening right now has got all my shackles up, all my, all the hairs on the back of my neck up. And I'm disgusted because, we as a country have always been loving and caring and accepting of immigration and people coming into our country. And so at this point...
Just to be fair, we did have internment camps for the Japanese, right?
Yes.
And there was there was plenty of Nazi rallies at Madison Square Garden in the 30s.
Right.
But as far as like the idea of saying we're going to basically separate families...
Right.
The trauma there is unquantifiable. But again, I want you to talk about somebody who has lived a blessed life that you have.
Okay.
Why should people who are living blessed lives care about what's going on?
Well, everybody should care about what's going on. Everyone should care about, other people, number one. Number two, I think that there are the haves and the have-nots.
And they're getting more and more. The divide is even bigger than it.
Well, the reason why it has become so great is because we all know is, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, I think 70s, I don't know when it changed, but the very wealthy people in our country were paying a much higher tax.
Big time.
And these taxes, that changed in Reagan years, right?
Well, with Kennedy, it was for every dollar you made over $1 million, you were taxed 90% on the dollar. But yeah, Reagan slashed all of that.
Reagan slashed, and the thing is that all that money was paying for people like me to get an education and also have, art classes or music classes or cooking. I mean, can you imagine that now? When I was in middle school, we had home economics, and then the guys were learning about woodworking.
Dude, they'd be driving cats from Berkeley out to do classes on suburban, life. I mean, it was. But the point is,
But it was more natural then because the money was being distributed more properly.
And it wasn't all about quantifying stuff. There was unquantifiable
but
stuff.
But now it's to the point where like what's his face, Trump is saying, oh, the economy's never been better. But yeah, and look at the stock market. It's like, I don't invest in the stock market,
Well, they talk about jobs reports, but they say all these jobs are created, but they don't talk about it being jobs that would actually people could survive on.
Right.
So there's a disconnect there.
There's such a disconnect. It's such a disconnect that I can't even believe it. But wrapping back around to your question, it's hard for me to actually.
No, you already answered it.
Did
you
I
answered
answer it?
No. You answered it in the fact that you were out on the street on a random night.
Yes.
Smiling. You made $1.
I made
$1.
$1.
$1, and you were happy as a clam.
Happy as a clam.
And you were engaging people, and that's
Engaging
the answer.
people.
Is inspiring change in your world, because those the vibration will then go out, because it's really all about raising frequencies, Tara, and that is ultimately why
I agree.
we connected. I mean, you said, how did you find me? Well, it's the frequencies, and it's about how are you raising the frequencies, and how are you going to raise that ultimate vibration.
Right.
And you can do it through music, and you can do it through rhythm, and you can do it through things like this.
Yes.
So I think we will definitely do part 2. I mean, it was a high honor to connect with you, and I want you to keep staying on the righteous path, Tara. To continued success to you, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate meeting with you. This is really fun. I don't think I've had an interview like this before.
No, and that's what everybody says, all 4,000 of them.
Oh, 4,000 of them.
Stay tuned for Reed Mathis later tonight on the Jake Feinberg Show. Tar Spring, thank you so much.
Thank you, dear.
All right, we'll see you later.